Hi, and welcome to Free Motion Quilting Basics. I'm Angelique and in today's episode, we're going to talk about probably the first and most important skill that you will need to learn to be a free motion quilter, and that's meandering. We're going to talk about two different types of meandering, the curve meandering and what a lot of people refer to as the puzzle piece meandering. And we're also going to introduce the concept of echoing. So let's talk about what is meandering. Well, meandering, the definition of the word is basically moving from one place to another without like a direct path or maybe kind of a windy or loopy path. And that is pretty much the same thing in quilting. We're going to be using meandering to either move from one pattern to another pattern so we can get to another place on our quilt, but it's also used to just fill up space. It's also one of the first patterns, if you'll call it that a lot of beginner quilters use because it helps them get familiar with their machine and how it works when they're moving it across the quilt. You can do this as push quilting, or you can do it with machine quilting like we do it here at Grace. Either way, it's just a great skill to learn, get really comfortable with, and it'll help you finish some of those quilts when you're in a hurry to get them done as well, and it just kind of creates a nice design. So let's take a look at some of the types of meandering that we're looking at. So here in this corner, I just did kind of a curvy line meander and just whenever I wanted to go. There's no real pattern, rhyme or reason to it. Started in the corner, moved kind of along, wanted to come back down and around, come over here and start filling in this block. And so that's just a very, very basic meander, no rhyme or reason, just go with the flow, get comfortable with your machine, fill in the blocks. Here, and I'll show you some other versions of it. This is a little tighter version of it, but this is our puzzle piece meander. So as you're kind of moving, you've got a little bit more of a pattern to it, but you create these little curves as you're moving around that make it look like a puzzle piece. And so we did this on this block as well. You can do them small or large on this example piece that I have here. I did some larger versions of the meander here. So as in this case, I did this puzzle piece meander and I kept it within a strip that I had as well. Did that here. And then one of the other things that we're going to talk about, and I've got a couple of examples here as well, is echoing. And so in the examples that I have here, the type of echoing that I did, I started and I just did a little kind of a wavy line, and then instead of going in the ditch, which I'll show you on the actual machine, I just kind of curved that around to keep it flowing. I wanted to keep it like create sort of a sense of movement, kind of going back and forth on that, and just kind of followed along so I have the same shape as the line before. And so these are some of the things that we're going to talk about today. You can see here where I did a little bit where I kind of changed direction. So I meandered with it and then I did a little bit of echoing through that to kind of change up the look. So very, very useful skills. Let's go ahead and get started on how to do that. So we have moved over to our frame. I already have prepared a quilt sandwich for us. This is just a simple panel. I want to remind you to be sure that you have cleaned your machine and oiled your machine, checked your tension, which I've already done. You can see I was playing with that up here. Since it's just a panel, I did it right on this. And so we're just going to start with a really basic meander like we talked about. And first thing we need to do is pull up our thread wherever it is that we decide we want to start. Now I am doing this on the Evolution hoop frame. The technique is pretty much the same regardless of what frame that you are on. Just with a hoop frame, whether it's this one or if you're using the Cutie or if you're using our new mini quilter, when you're meandering, you just got to think about where you're going to go and where you're going to end, because you do have to move that up. This one is pretty much fits this frame. I just have the borders here that I would end up having to shift and move later. So kind of focusing on the center part, it's going to be a lot like a rolling frame in terms of kind of how to deal with that. So I've brought up my thread and I'm just going to start meandering. Not doing anything super special here. I'm just going to let my body and my hands take me to wherever it is that I'm going to go. I have this set on cruise mode. If you're kind of new to this, I would recommend starting in precise just until you get really comfortable. And so I'm just moving around. Long streaks if I want. I can do a few little curves or S's. I just want to do some stitching to hold my batting down. Can be very useful. So like I did a bag with a bunch of scraps. I just did a meandering pattern because I just wanted to hold it down. I was going to be cutting it up anyway. I can do a little bit of echoing, which we're going to talk a little bit more about as we get kind of closer to our next type of meander. But basically, I have no direct path. I have no direct pattern. I'm just going where I want to go. If I want to go up, I go up. If I want to go right, I go right. If I want to go back left, I go left, and kind of so on. Right? So I want you to just really practice that basic meander on, you know, some scrap fabric or something like that, because this is going to help you get comfortable with your machine. And as you get more comfortable, move from precise to cruise, and then move from cruise to manual. Get a real feel for how your machine works as a beginning quilter. Now we're going to move on to something a little bit more difficult, and that's what some people call the puzzle piece meander, kind of like a curvy meander. And this one has a little bit more of a pattern to it, but it's still a meander. There's lots of different ways to meander. It gets you from point A to point B or fills up your quilt. And so with the puzzle piece one, we're going to draw it out first, and then we're going to give it a try on the machine. Right, so we finished up kind of doing our just little wavy meander. Now before we get to the next one, I want to do a little practice. And it's really about creating some muscle memory, getting used to the shape, because like I said, it's a little bit more difficult because you are creating a pattern even though you're just meandering around as you do that. And you're going to have access to these documents on our events page. You'll be able to download these PDFs and practice them as well. So we're going to start with that puzzle piece meander. And with the first one here, you're just going to do your best to trace the line as closely as possible without lifting your pen. That's really what's going to create that muscle memory. And then you're going to go to your machine and maybe practice moving it around before you actually start stitching, just so you're like, okay, I can see what the similarities are there. So I'm just going to start up here in the line. And it's okay if you get off a little bit. You're just trying to get the general feel for how this works, right? It's about creating smoothness as you're kind of moving along in your curves and doing that meander. So as you can see, I'm not perfectly in line here. I'm just getting a feel for the pattern. So as you can kind of see, as you want to wiggle across to move to a next thing before creating the next puzzle piece. And you can create as many or a few loops as you like. I have a tendency to like to do threes when I draw them on my own, with a couple of twos here and there. I just like the tighter look of it better. So I'm just going to kind of end this here, but as you can see, the pattern kind of continues on. And then we have another page, and that page is completely blank for you. So just kind of pretend that each of these squares here is like a block on your quilt. And so if you want to practice, I only want to do it in one block, block and try to fill that block in before moving to the other one, you can. Or if you want to treat it like it's a complete row, do that, right? So start wherever you like. You don't have to start in that corner like we did before. Maybe you kind of like to start from the bottom. And now just kind of practice the design that you want to create in that puzzle piece meander. Right, so you can kind of get that feel for how that's going to look. And it's okay to kind of switch it up. Like I said, if you are doing this on a hoop frame, you need to kind of think about where you want to go and where you want to end so that you can limit how many times you have to move your quilt sandwich around, right? So that just kind of gives you a feel for the flow before you go and do it on your machine. Right, now that we've practiced it, let's go try it out. Now that we've practiced our puzzle piece meander by drawing it out, we're going to go ahead and come back to the machine here and practice it on here. I'm just going to start that puzzle piece where I left off with my basic meander from before. So we want it to look like puzzle pieces. They're going to be a little bit tighter. You can make them large or small. Again, I'm just still kind of filling up the space here and just kind of creating kind of some little loops, if you will. All right, so can you see how we've kind of created this little shape here? So it kind of looks like a puzzle. And then here we have another one. And then sometimes we'll have two. They kind of look like bones to me sometimes. And we're just going to kind of continue that pattern. If I want to move up, I may just kind of swirl up to create that to get into the next space. But as you can see, I'm still meandering. It's just a little bit more conscious of the pattern that I'm coming up with. This one is going to be very helpful to practice now as sort of a larger pattern, because when you do a really dense, smaller version of this, especially with our stippling foot, what you get is what we call stippling. And some people call this stippling as well, but stippling really is when it's more condensed so that certain areas of your quilt are really going to pop and puff up and other parts of your quilt are going to lay flatter. And so you create that tighter stippling, but we're just doing this right now as a typical puzzle meander. It is a little bit more difficult when you're stippling because you are working in a smaller area, and so you've got tighter curves that you're making as well. So that's why I say this one's you really want to practice for a while on that. So let's kind of continue that to the end. Just kind of creating that puzzle piece look to it. Kind of back and forth, a little rounded and loopy. And you'll see all kinds of patterns for this in terms of you want to do pantographs or whatever. Each person's is a little bit different, but you get the general effect here of how it allows you to really go back and forth. And you can with this one as well, kind of come back and do a little echoing. So I'm just going to finish this to the row and take it down, give you an idea of what it would look like to the next row. And come back up here. And again, no real direction, just wherever I feel like going, but trying to maintain that pattern. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end this one here, and I'm going to move my quilt up because I want some fresh space so we can talk about echoing. All right, so we've talked a little bit about echoing in a couple of the places that I worked on here, but let's take a break from our quilt and go ahead and review and practice some echoing before we come back to the frame. Right, so we're going to go back to drawing on our patterns. So this PDF, you can print it out. I like to do it on my iPad because then I can erase and do it again over and over again. But if you're more of a paper pencil person, feel free to print out the PDF and do it that way. You can print it out as many times as you like. So this one, you see the first part's just got a lot of straight lines, and that's to kind of help you with spacing and thinking about direction as you're doing it, and then also traveling in that ditch if you're not going across like an entire row where I kind of showed you on the quilt there. You know, if you swing around, you can do that as well. So I'm going to start up here in this top corner, and again, I don't want to lift my pen up and then kind of draw down. That's where the ditch is going to be, and then follow the arrow back. Right, and so I'm just going to kind of do that back and forth, and the arrows tell you what direction to go. Keeping in mind that when you are doing straight lines, especially going from right to left, you need to slow down so that your hook can keep up with you. Let's do an example of one of the angled lines. So I'll change colors so you can see that a little bit better. But I'm going to start up in this corner. I'm following that ditch. As you can see, these lines. So I'd have a kind of a double there. And this might be also where you kind of start doing a little bit of ruler work to really help you stay in the ditch when you're trying to transition from one to the other. Right. We have some that are wider spaced, so you can get comfortable with different types of spacing as well. And then we move you into some of those curly lines again, closer together, further apart, with arrows to kind of help you think about that. If you're going into the ditch like this one, or if you want to loop it around like I showed you on the practice piece or the example piece that I gave you. Right, so there's a couple different ways that you can do that. Here we have some echoing where, you know, because of the shape of the echo, it kind of changes, but it just kind of helps you think about where you need to get in the ditch to kind of finish that up. And try to keep that going along there. And then of course you have the blank areas so that you can practice some of your own echo designs. So what we're going to do on the quilt is we're just going to start with a longer line and then maybe loop it across, or maybe we go in the ditch until we get to a place that we want to be, and then just practice following, creating that echo from the previous one. And so that's what we're going to do now. Let's move back to the quilt. All right, so now that we've practiced and talked a little bit more about echoing, we're going to give it a try here on our quilt sandwich. And so there's lots of different ways to echo. I'm going to just start in the corner here of this particular block. And I'm going to start, like I said, in our practice with a little just wavy meander, okay? So I'm just going to wave that to here. And so I can, because I have kind of a shape, if this was an actual block, then I would have a ditch here. I would just travel into this ditch until the place that I want to go, and then I'm going to follow this back till I get to the next ditch, and then I'm going to move till it's about even, and then I'm going to follow it again. So I want to try to keep my spacing as similar as possible and maintain that shape that I've created with that first wavy meander. We're going to do lots of meandering in some of our other designs as we kind of move through beginning quilting. Like when we talk about feathers, echoing around feathers is really fun. There's other types of shapes that you can create where adding that echoing is going to kind of expand that design. So it's really a great thing to practice now for when we advance to the other ones. All right, so I'm just going to kind of carry this over. And I'm going to create a different one here. And I'm going to follow this line up until I'm about ready to start. And again, kind of move across that. Now with something like this, I kind of told you in the other practice stuff to, maybe start with the precise mode. With this, it's a little bit harder to do that precise mode because you're going to be starting and stopping, which means your machine's going to hesitate, and you don't really want that. So really use your start and stop buttons and work in the cruise so you can just focus on moving your machine and following that pattern that you created and not worrying about the little hiccup that occurs when you're in precise mode. You need to take full control over that, and then maybe later, once you get more comfortable, try the manual. So you're like, oh, I need to slow down or I need to speed up depending on the types of curves that you're creating. Now, what if you're just really, really struggling trying to maintain that shape? Mine are pretty good. They're pretty close, as you can kind of see, because my area got a little bit more narrow here. I could only do certain parts of the echoing to kind of keep that shape. Well, we do have echoing feet available in our 9-piece set. You get 3 different sizes, so you can really kind of create something where you start with a large echo and then you move them smaller and smaller and smaller, or vice versa. And the echoing feet look like this. Right, so you have your large one, and that's just going to give you an edge to line up with. It comes with that special foot. I'm telling you, this 9-piece set has allowed me to be so creative with the different designs that I do. This just pops in here, what goes on there, and then you line this up to the edge of your previous one, and you'll keep larger ones. This is the medium one for creating that echoing, and then when you want to make them small. So this will kind of help you with your spacing until you get more comfortable with it. I'm just doing it with the regular hopping foot here, kind of using that as my guide, and my eyes is my guide. Sometimes I like it when it's, the shape is there, but sometimes they're a little bit tighter in some places and closer in the other. I think it creates interest in the quilt. So I hope you have enjoyed learning a little bit more about meandering, and I really encourage you to get to practicing the different things that we showed you today. Your regularly curvy one, your puzzle piece one, kind of wavy lines, get used to that echoing. And remember that the document that I showed you, you can download on our website, graceframe.com, print it out, practice, get really familiar with your machine, with your frame, with the ideas of quilting, until we see you for the next episode of Basic Free Motion Quilting. Thanks again for joining us.